Welcome to a special edition of Every Woman on DETV. I'm Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester, and I am thrilled to be back for another important discussion. Our conversation today is about voting rights and democracy. And today in Delaware, we are incredibly fortunate to have some special guests with us here for the program. First, my friend and colleague in the Senate, Senator Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota. And Senator, I have to say I'm so proud because she is here. She is the author of the Freedom to Vote Act. She has shepherded through the Electoral Count Act as chair of the Rules Committee, which has jurisdiction over elections. And a lot of people don't know that. Amy, it's so wonderful to have you here.
Well, thank you, Congresswoman. It's so great to be in Delaware and just to be able to work with you. You also have been such a champion of voting rights in Congress, and I just believe that everything hinges on whether or not people have a right to vote so that they get to have their own, make their own decisions about their own destinies.
Thank you, Senator. And we also have another friend who I'm sure is familiar to all of you here in Delaware, our Attorney General, Kathy Jennings, who I've had the opportunity and the honor of working on some very important things to our state. She is courageous, she is tireless, and she is an advocate for our families and for our children. And so we're glad to have you here as well. General Jennings, I'll call you in this moment.
Nice alliteration.
Yes, it is. It is. And while I know both of you, I want Delaware to know a little bit more about you, Amy, and why this issue of voting rights is so important, why democracy is so important.
So I did not come from a political family. My dad was a journalist, covered the Vikings, whole nother story.
Okay.
And my mom was a teacher, but I got really interested in politics. I actually had my own experience when our daughter was born. She couldn't swallow, and they kicked me out of the hospital after 24 hours. And as a mom, I went to the legislature and got a bill passed guaranteeing new moms and their babies a 48-hour hospital stay. Wow. So after that, I was hooked on democracy and this idea that you could actually get something done no matter where you came from. So that's what led me to get really involved in this idea that you just can't have wealthy people run for office, and you just can't have a situation where, in the words of one of my friends in the Senate, our Reverend Raphael Warnock, some people don't want some people to vote. And then what happens is they come up with all these rules, and if suddenly you can't vote on Saturday, or you can't vote by mail all of a sudden, all these things that have been going on around the country. And I ended up chairing the Rules Committee in the Senate, and we have worked really hard on getting some minimal standards in place on federal law so that you don't have what's happening across the country. And I'm also really worried about threats on election officials and some of what we've seen in these last few elections. One of the election administrators, a Republican over in Pennsylvania, I had him at a hearing. He talked about how his family had to leave their house because Al Schmidt, because of threats against them, and that kind of thing was going on all over the country. So all of this means your vote to right is precious, and you've got to see it that way and exercise it, because there are some people that want to take it away from you.
Thank you for sharing that, because again, the notion of connecting your vote and democracy with your life. For you, it was about your child that kind of inspired you. And you also talked about these rights being stripped from us. And that leads me to you, Kathy. A lot of people know you here in Delaware, but can you tell our Every Woman audience what got you interested in this issue in particular of voting rights and democracy and even public service?
Well, thank you, Congresswoman and Senator. It's an honor to be with these very strong, accomplished women today to talk about the right to vote. I view the right to vote as the most important right we have in America. My mom used to tell me, I was raised by a single mom, and she always voted. And she told me people fought for this right. People died for this right. People in parts of our country were thrown in prison for trying to exercise this right. And so it is foundational to our democracy, and we can never take it for granted. And all of us must be vigilant in protecting that fundamental right, even here in Delaware, where the far right attacked two of our most important voting rights, early voting and absentee voting, permanent absentee voting. Those rights are incredibly important to working families.
Right.
They're very important to people who are homebound, can't leave their homes. They're very important to our service members and so everyday working Americans in this country. And so we need to make sure we protect those rights. Those rights were under attack even in the blue safe state of Delaware. And I went to court and fought to have those rights reinstated. And the Supreme Court of the state of Delaware reinstated the rights. So right now in Delaware, our voting rights are secure. But that doesn't stop us from being vigilant throughout the country. Attorneys general throughout our country are banding together to fight lawsuits and to ensure that people have that right to vote.
You know, I think it's important to put into context for people because you hear all the time how important voting is. And I think for some people, they feel like, well, what difference does it make? And, you know, even as you were both speaking, you think about some of the things that are important and precious to us. You know, when I think about my work on clean slate legislation, or the work that we've been able to do to bring clean drinking water to parts of our state, or focus on clean air monitors, or jobs in the economy, these things are tied to our ability to get the resources. They're tied to our ability to pass the laws. They're tied to our vote. And so, you know, as we have this conversation, I want to dig a little bit deeper into this conversation. But before we really get started, I want to level set with someone who was really special to me. You know, we know that our democracy hangs in the balance. You know, Amy, you and I saw it firsthand when on January 6th, you know, we were there when insurrectionists stormed the Capitol. You know, many people know I was trapped up in the gallery on that day, up in the balcony. And so we saw how fragile it is and how one person's obsession with power can, you know, really try to overturn the will of the American people. And so we know that this fight for our democracy is vital, it's urgent, it's important. And, you know, if that right wasn't so important, people wouldn't be trying to take it away from us, wouldn't be trying to make you, you know, travel distances to do it, or stand in lines to do it, or count jelly beans to do it. And so we continue today to see these attacks across the country on whether it's voter suppression, whether it's gerrymandering, where they draw the lines in a way that, you know, is unfair, and efforts to make it harder for people, whether it's people of color, whether it's our seniors, or individuals with disabilities, or people who live in rural areas. We've seen it right here in Delaware. And so I just wanted to take a moment for you to hear why these fights are still so important. And I was reminded of a conversation that I had a few years ago with the late, great Congressman John Lewis, who was a champion of voting rights. Let's hear John's words about voting.
My colleague, Lisa. Let me just say that the vote is almost sacred. It is precious.
Yes.
It is the most powerful, nonviolent instrument or tool we have in a democratic society.
You know, it was so powerful hearing John's voice. You know, like Kathy, I could just feel you take that deep breath. And you think about what is at stake in this moment. You know, we talk about all the things that are on the ballot. And we think about our moment to run this race. And, you know, I would love for both of you to talk about the federal level, what's happening now, what do we expect to see, what do we hope to see as well, and then on the state level, sort of the battle that we just went through and what needs to happen as we move forward to make sure that we codify, that we put into law the protections that we need. So, Senator, if you could talk a little bit about what's happening on the federal level, and we could even talk about some of the things that are actually in the legislation, because a lot of people don't realize this is bigger than just that vote. You know, it's also when can people vote? Is it a national holiday? What is the influence of dollars into these races? All of that deal with our democracy. Share a little bit about the bill.
Well, first of all, Lisa, I just want to thank you for sharing that clip because you're carrying on the torch for John Lewis. You've done that with your voting rights work in the House of Representatives, and it's very, very important right now. As the Attorney General just explained, there's a tax even in states like Delaware on the right to vote. So really three things. The first one is this Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Act. They're kind of combined. And the first one is to make sure that you have minimum standards when it comes to things like ballot boxes and making sure you can mail in your votes so that won't be taken away. By the way, that is the way of voting in a very red state, Utah, and a number of other red states. So this idea that the Republicans would be challenging it makes no sense at all. And that also you can do something when it comes to money in politics, which is really the second thing. For me, just coming from not a lot of money, I couldn't put money into my own race. I still remember when I was first running for Senate and I couldn't get anyone to contribute because no one could say my last name. It wasn't as easy as yours. And so I was calling, no one would call me back. And I finally just called everyone I knew in my life. And I raised what is still an all-time Senate record. I raised $17,000 from ex-boyfriends. And as my husband has pointed out, it's not an expanding base. So that was the sort of propelled me to think this isn't quite fair.
Right.
So, you know, we should really reverse the Citizens United decision, which allowed all this outside money to flow in. And I don't care if you're a Democrat, Republican, or independent, you want to be able to have your own say and not have billionaires have more of a say than you. And so that idea of everything from making sure you have matching funds for financing elections to making sure there's transparency so people understand who is funding these things. Right. Then the very last thing would be with the advent of artificial intelligence, AI, that we have some limits on what can happen with advertisements politically. And I have a bipartisan bill with a conservative Republican that basically says you can take down deepfakes, not satire, but that if someone is pretending to be you, Lisa, and you can't tell it's you or not, it's outrageous. So people are going to see these videos or ads and they're not going to know if it's the candidate they love or that the candidate they don't like, because you can't tell the difference. So putting in some standards nationally on that would be a very smart thing to do.
Right. Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah.
And what has to happen next to make sure that this
I think that having a president and a House and a Senate that would clearly support these types of bills, that's how you get it done. Because just my perspective is the Republicans have even blocked the AI bill. They blocked the Freedom to Vote Act. And so we really, in the Senate, will need an exemption from the filibuster, which I know you're supportive of, I'm supportive of, to get a federal standard like almost every other democracy has when it comes to voting rights.
Thank you so much for being such a champion on this. I think a lot of people didn't even know we have these different committees in the House and the Senate where bills come through. And someone just the other day said, it's not the Rules Committee. I said, yeah, it is.
In the Senate, it is.
Amy is leading this in the Senate. Thank you. And Kathy, talk a little bit about what is happening here in Delaware and where we go for the future of making sure that we're protecting voting rights.
Thanks for that question. And let me just say, your courage on January 6th is something I will always take with me so that my children and grandchildren know what it takes to really protect democracy. in our country. In Delaware, we don't have vote by mail. It was struck down by our court, even though vote by mail is present, as you say, Senator, in red states and blue states, and it's pretty gosh darn accepted for many years, but we don't have it. We need a constitutional amendment to have vote by mail passed in our blue state. That
or
takes
federal, for the federal elections, if you did a federal standard.
Exactly. And that takes me to the point that who we elect as our leaders at the federal level and at the state level really matters. That's the difference between being able to vote by mail and not being able to vote by mail. And the more we can expand the right to vote and the ease and accessibility through which we vote, the more democratic our country becomes. Right. We did pass a law that banned guns at polling places. That's a very practical, sensible law, because frankly, if people see guns at polling places, who's going to want to go into the polling place? Right. But that one wasn't so hard. Vote by mail will take some real willpower, and it will take a while to get done. But I am confident that we will get it done with the right elected leaders in place.
No, thank you. You know, what an incredible conversation. And I thank you both for this, and want to make sure that you all know that Delaware's voter registration deadline is October 12th, just 4 days after this taping. And a litany of other states also have their registration deadlines coming up. So tell your friends, tell your family across the country that people should check to see where they're registered. If they're registered, if they haven't registered, they need to do it. And they can go to iwillvote.com for more information. But this is important, that people are more likely to vote if they have a plan to do so that fits their lives. So we know so much is at stake in 2024, and we need massive voter turnout. Encourage people that you're connected to, that their vote is connected to their lives. And we'll end with this last question to both of you. Why do you think it is so important to vote in this election?
Well, I think everyone knows there's so much on the line when it comes to having people's back on bringing down costs. You got to decide, does that matter to you? Who do you want to vote for? Whether it's about freedom to make your own decisions about your health care, all those things are on the line. But I also believe it's your sacred duty. And the Attorney General mentioned January 6th. I made that walk at 3:30 in the morning, and it was just the Vice President Pence, the former Vice President, and another Republican senator and myself, with these 3 pairs of young women with the mahogany boxes containing all the electoral ballots for the country. This is, the morning had been a celebration. We make the walk, yay, we get to the House, you're there. And then they objected to Arizona. We go back, and that's when the insurrection occurs. Everyone's taken out of there, chaos, people are shot, over 100 police officers injured. And then fast forward, 3:30 in the morning, this time we're walking alone, except for 3 of us and those 3 pairs of women with those boxes. And in it was Delaware's votes. And we walked over broken glass and by pillars spray painted with racist vulgarities, but we made it. And you were there, and we got there, and democracy prevailed. So if that story doesn't make you think about the march we're still on for democracy that John Lewis took over that bridge and that we still are on today, I just think we have a sacred obligation to vote. And then the final thing I'll say is that Minnesota has the highest voter turnout in the state. So for the people of Delaware, if, you know, I'll make a bet, and if somehow you can beat us at 75%, I will get you fried cheese curds for the Minnesota State Fair. So I'm just saying that we take it seriously in our state, and I always try to get other states to bet with us, and then we always win. But, you know, it's possible. So, you know, it is so, having that feeling where everyone, 75% of the people vote, they come up to me all the time. Sometimes they say, I didn't vote for you, but I agree with you on this. I did vote for you, but this. They just feel like they're part of that franchise. And I think that's one of the most important things about voting.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing that. And and taking us back into that moment. And thank you for your leadership. I mean, again, when we think about that day, January 6th, and your role that history will show that you played in it. I'm just so honored to have you here in Delaware. Truly, truly honored to have you here in Delaware. I don't know if I want the cheese curds, but, and there might be a better incentive for Delawareans, but again, we want to take you up on that. And I'm going to turn to our Attorney General to please share, why is voting so important to you?
It's always been important because, as the senator said, it's our duty. But it's important because we are all students of history. John Lewis walked over that Emmett Pettus Bridge, and he was horribly beaten for believing in the future of our country as a free country where every vote counts and every vote matters. I know you led people in prayer inside the House on January 6th. My prayer is that every Delawarean and everyone in this country exercises this most fundamental of all rights. And we're going to fight hard to make sure that people who get elected in our state and in our country believe in the rule of law, that they believe in justice, and that they believe that people should vote, not that they're going to block them from voting. And that's why we need to elect leaders like the two of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kathy, again, for your leadership and for standing up. You know, what I love about Kathy Jennings is that she's like, let's just get it done. It's not a lot of clicks and likes out there that she's worried about. She is just, let's get this stuff done. The words justice that you use, and you know, I think of you when I think of justice. I think of you when I think of freedom. I think of you when I think of advocating for our state. And so thank you for your leadership as well. And as both of you talked, and especially talking about the obligation of voting and the sacred duty, I also think it's a sacred privilege. And I'm so glad, again, you took me back to that space up there in the balcony when all I could do was pray for love over hate, you know, and hope over fear. And I carry with me so many places, so many people have seen this scarf that was really the document that allowed our great-great-great-grandfather who had been enslaved to Georgia to have the right to vote. And, you know, from 1867, the returns of qualified voters in Reconstruction oath. And at the bottom is the X that he marked because he couldn't read or write. Wow. And I carry this and I think about what people did for this right. You know, whether it was women locking arms, marching for this right, you know, whether it was folks coming out of internment camps, like the Japanese saying, this is my right, Native Americans, you could literally go down the list of folks that fought for this right. And in the video, in John's words, he said the words that we're saying now. We don't want to go back. We don't want to go back. We want to go forward. And so I am so grateful that you were here to talk about this important conversation. I hope that people will see it as a duty, as a right, as a privilege, but also connect their lives to their ballot, from clean air, clean drinking water, health care. All of those things are connected to your right to vote. We began the program with a quote from the late, great Congressman John Lewis, and now we'll conclude the program with his words of wisdom.
We cannot become frustrated. We cannot get lost in a sea of despair.
Yes.
We must always be hopeful and optimistic that it's all going to work out. But we got to help it work out.
We got to help it work out. Every year, someone tells you, this is the most important election of our lifetimes. Well, in the words of Congressman Jim Clyburn, this one is the most consequential. The consequences of this election we will feel for decades, if not generations. Our democracy, our freedoms, our rights are on the ballot. And every race, from the top of the ticket to the bottom, counts. I'm reminded of how close we were to losing our democracy on January 6th. And I will tell you, as I watched those guns being drawn on the House floor, and as I could hear the banging behind me, as I said, I prayed for love over hate and hope over fear. That was all I could think to do in that moment. But also on that day, people ask if it was my worst or if it was, the worst day I've had in Congress. And I'll tell you, especially hearing from you, it was the toughest day, but it was also for me the proudest moment because we came back.
That's right.
We came back and we certified that election, and democracy prevailed. And so our democracy is also on the line in November, but we can win. We can pass voting rights protection once and for all. And we're not just in this voting for candidates, we're voting for the future of our democracy and of our country. And for me personally, I'm also voting for my granddaughter. So no matter what side you support, I always tell people, connect your vote to your life. As I've shared, all those things that we hold dear are on the ballot. So we want you to vote. And we want you to make sure that we protect that vote for you, your family, and that we get everybody out. We want to beat Minnesota in the number of people that are coming out to vote. And we want to let people know it matters to us because it's your life, it's your power. Use it.